Welcome to my new video. Let's talk a little bit about charcoal and how to use it to create realistic artworks. Charcoal is so much fun. It's so versatile and so expressive. Let's just kick off the video with some of the materials. Let's just start with compressed charcoal. Compressed charcoal is quite hard, quite scratchy. It's charcoal that has a binder in it, and it produces these very dark, deep marks, very black, that are very, very difficult to erase. Then we've got vine charcoal. And vine charcoal or willow charcoal is made from grapevines or willow trees, and basically it is just burnt wood. There's no binder in it. And this is much softer. It's not quite as dark. It's a little bit easier to blend because it doesn't scrub into the paper so much, and it's much easier to erase. I basically use this vine charcoal for blocking in my drawings, my sketches for paintings, and just trying to get like basic lines and shapes in, because it's so easy to erase. In terms of erasing charcoal, one of my favourite tools is a putty eraser, and you can mould it, you can create it into any form that you want, and it's really good for erasing charcoal. So you can see with the vine charcoal, look how easy that is to erase, whereas with the compressed charcoal, so much harder to erase, doesn't really erase properly. So we can use this as an eraser, so we can use it to pull out big chunks of that charcoal away from the paper. But you can also use it as a drawing tool. So for example, if you were doing like fine details or like fur strands, you can use it to pick out little bits of detail, just like this. You could draw shapes with it. It's a great drawing tool as well as an erasing tool. So some of the other types of charcoal that I use to apply are charcoal pencils, and I've got two charcoal pencils that I use most of the time. I've got an HB charcoal pencil and a 2B charcoal pencil. So the HB pencil is quite light, quite scratchy, you can see that there, and then the 2B pencil is much darker and much softer. So hopefully you can see the difference between the two. And then again, you can blend them with your fingers if you wanted to, and you can see that the 2B much darker and much more easily blended. Now, the pencils themselves actually contain compressed charcoal, so they aren't as easy to erase as the vine charcoal, so you can see doesn't quite erase as much there, and the 2B really doesn't erase as much. So they are very, very dark charcoals. Another really important tool in my charcoal drawing arsenal is the tortillon. This is what it's properly called, but it's sometimes called a blending stump. And mine's very dirty. I like my tortillon to be a little bit dirty because it allows me to actually draw with it as well as blend. So if I wanted to blend with it, I can take the tortillon and I can just use it to smudge that charcoal a little bit in just a little bit more of a controlled manner instead of using my finger, and depending on how hard I press, I can get a different gradient of charcoal blending on there. So I can really create these nice smooth transitions. And then also, as it builds up, as we get a slightly dirtier tortillon, we can use this again for making marks. So I can use this for drawing details like fur or smaller little sections where I don't need to be as dark. So I don't need to use a charcoal stick, I don't need to use compressed charcoal. I can use the tortillon to just apply some of that charcoal in a much lighter way and still keeping it relatively controlled. Charcoal pencils obviously need sharpening, And the way that I sharpen them, because pencil sharpeners and electric sharpeners do not work with charcoal, it just snaps. So the way that I sharpen them, and warning, there is going to be a knife coming up here, so I'm not going to take the blade out, but this knife, I sharpen them, make sure it's a very sharp knife, I sharpen them till they look like this, and obviously they are not super sharp. Now, my charcoal drawings and the way that I work, because I work quite big, I do not need super fine pointed charcoal sticks. But if I were to need a super fine charcoal pencil, I would use one of these. So these things come in pretty much all standard charcoal sets that you get, and most people don't really know what they are used for. You can use them for two things. You can use them for cleaning your tortillon, so you can it's sandpaper, you can sand away the layers of dirty tortillon. Let me just do this a little bit. This is an old piece of sandpaper, so it might not work, but you can sand away tortillon. Yeah, it's not really working on this one, but basically I'll show you actually. So you can actually rip these away and expose fresh sandpaper. Let's try this again. So you can see that if you just continue to sand it away, you can get a fresh tortillon that doesn't have that charcoal on it. I don't recommend doing this over your picture because you end up with a load of dust everywhere. Then we can also use this to sharpen the charcoal pencils. So we can use a sandpaper and we can just grind them down just a little bit, just like this, to create a sharper point. Now, I'm not going to do it all the way because I don't use the sharp charcoal pencils, but yeah, that's how you would do it, to create a really sharp point without snapping the charcoal. And then this charcoal dust that's left, you can actually save and you can use in your drawings. So I'll just smudge that around with the blending stump. And then finally, one of the other tools that I use is Fixative. I use this Winsor & Newton Fixative, and it is great for sealing my charcoal drawings when I'm done, so I just give that a spray when I've finished the picture. Sometimes they take 1 or 2 coats. So those are just the basic tools that everyone can use to make charcoal artwork. Remember, charcoal is not like drawing with pencils. It can be really messy, it can be rough, and it can be anything that you want it to be. And that's one of the reasons that I love charcoal. You can be bold and you can be expressive. You can be really neat and controlled, or you can be a combination of the two. Let me show you just another really cool thing with charcoal, and this is charcoal powder. And I use this for all of my charcoal drawings. It's amazing for blocking in really large shapes and values, and it's also really, really easy to erase. So I will actually apply this in a number of different ways. One of the most common ways is with a piece of cotton wool. So just get your charcoal powder on your cotton wool, and then we can just use it to put down a huge mass of charcoal powder. Just like that. And then this is super, super easy to erase. We can just come in and pick up lots and lots of that charcoal. Because you're not really like pressing it in too much, it's really, really easy to pull away from the paper. So you can buy this. So this is what I've done here. I've got this Cretacolor charcoal powder, or you can make it yourself. I do both. So I have some really dark charcoal powder from my compressed sticks that I make myself just by sanding it on the sandpaper and then collecting it in a small tub. Or I have that lighter tub which is made from the vine charcoal. So this stuff, the vine charcoal, which is much, much lighter. It's super subtle, and you can use a brush if you wanted to. So sometimes I like to use a makeup brush, and just with some of that charcoal on there, I'll come in and I'll just use a makeup brush to apply some of that charcoal. And again, that isn't quite scrubbed in as much as the cotton wool. It's only lightly applied, so it can be erased really easily as well. The lighter you press on the surface with the charcoal, the easier it is to erase. Basically, you want to experiment with as many different ways of applying the charcoal as possible to find different things that you like and different marks that you can make. There are a few other little tools that I use, one of which is this little indent tool. So you can actually use this to very, very lightly indent your paper. And I've seen a lot of people use this, and if I'm being very honest, I'm not a huge fan of indenting. I use it for whiskers and things in my wildlife arts, but I don't like how it potentially damages the paper. But then you can indent, and you can just use some charcoal, and hopefully you can see there that charcoal is just sitting nicely over the top of those lines that I've just made. Then you can use an eraser. That could be a putty eraser, or it could be a different eraser. So this is called a Tombow mono eraser. It's got a very, very fine point, but then you can come in and you can use that Tombow eraser to pick out those lines in a little bit more detail, make them a little bit more obvious, and you can see how white they go, nearly back to the original paper colour. There's also one final tool that I use, which is a Derwent electric eraser. You can use whatever electric eraser that you want, but I do find these are amazing for getting things back to the white of the paper, or as close to as possible. So we've used the putty eraser and all the various erasers here. Let me just show you how much better this Derwent eraser is. So I don't know if you can see that, but look how much cleaner and how much whiter that one is. And then if we do it over here as well, so you can see it goes much lighter. And then even with the compressed charcoal, we can erase quite a bit of that compressed charcoal with the electric eraser. Obviously it's not going to go back to complete white, but it is a good start. Now, one tool that I've seen a lot of people use that I no longer use is a white pencil or a white chalk pencil. Sometimes you'll see these called white charcoal pencils, but they're not. You can't get white charcoal, it's just white chalk or white pastel. So you could use these in your pictures as well. You can see it does add a little bit more value changes to your pictures. You can use it for blending the charcoal, but I'm not really a fan of it. So you could use it for like really, really tiny hairs if you wanted to, but I'm not really a fan because I think it makes the drawing go a little bit blue. And also when you spray fixative on it, so if you look at all of this here that I've just done, let me just get a little bit of fixative and just spray it on there. Watch what happens. It all just sort of disappears. And I do not like that because I like to have fixative on my drawings when they're done. I like to make sure they can't be smudged or damaged. So I use the fixative and I frame them as soon as I can. But that white chalk over the top, when you spray it, it disappears and it just gets this sort of like a blue tinge, which I don't like. So with all of my charcoal pieces, the white that you can see is just the white of the paper showing through. That is just a quick sort of overview of the basics of charcoal and what you can do with it. Let me now show you how we can use it to create something really awesome. For what you've just seen, I was using Fabriano hot-pressed watercolour paper, the 300 GSM kind. For this part of the demo, I'm going to be using Bristol board. The surface with charcoals is really important. You don't want a paper that has loads of grain. You want quite a smooth paper. But there is a sweet spot. You don't want it too smooth. For my big realistic pieces, I use the Fabriano paper. For my looser, more abstract pieces, which are a little bit more expressive, like I'm going to be doing here, I use the Bristol board because it's smoother and the charcoal spreads around that surface a little bit more easily. It's easier to erase, however, the values don't go as dark as with the Fabriano watercolour paper. And if you've watched my other videos, you'll know that I love pushing the dark values. I like to create really high contrast charcoal drawings. For these more expressive pieces, I just like to start by creating a mess. I use an applicator to put charcoal powder all over the page in the basic shapes and structures that I can see from my reference photo. In this case, I'm using a makeup brush to spread the charcoal around. Then, once I've got a solid base, before I start adding any more charcoal, I can just use a blending stump to try to reinforce some of the lines and structures a little bit more. The blending stump is just that little bit more controlled than the brush. Then I can use the putty eraser to start removing some of that charcoal and help establish some of the lighter areas of the form and structure of the subject I'm trying to draw. Again, these early stages are just about making a mess, having fun, and experimenting. If you hadn't already guessed, I am drawing a tiger. I'm just doing this quite quickly. It is just a quick freehand sketch, so it's not going to be super realistic. But I'm going to give it a good go for probably about the hour that I have to paint this. The next stage in my charcoal drawing process is reinforcing the structures and a few more of the details of the tiger itself. So to do this, I'm using some vine charcoal. Remember that soft charcoal, which can be easily erased if I need it to. With all of my charcoal drawings like this that I freehand, I always start as light as possible and build up to the darks as I progress. I don't want to put something that can't be erased right at the beginning of the process. I want everything to be able to move and adjust as I go. So that's why vine charcoal is perfect for this sketching stage. Then it's on to the details, and I always start with my Tombow mono eraser and my putty eraser. Even though this is one of my more expressive free-handed pieces, I still like to include some of those details in the focal points of the picture. This is why in the early stages we don't press too hard with the charcoal so it can be easily erased from the paper. Once I'm happy with the positions of everything, and again this is just a quick rough sketch, so there are some proportions that are out on this, but once I'm happy, I will move on to refining the picture. First with some more vine charcoal, because I don't want to put in my darkest values straight away, and then moving on to the charcoal pencils, my darkest darks. I save them for last. They are the most permanent and the hardest to erase. They can be used for the stripes and some of the tiny darker strands of fur in the main body of the tiger. Then I'm going to do something that I said I wasn't going to do, which is use some white chalk. You can use this to add all kinds of tiny details and highlights. It can really make a big difference to charcoal drawings and really bring them to life. However, I do not like it. That is just my personal opinion, and I tend not to use it in my larger wildlife drawings because of the reasons that I said earlier in the video. I think it makes the process take a heck of a lot longer, and you risk the chance of completely destroying or altering your picture when you spray the fixative over the top of it. Which, for some of the pieces that I spend days, weeks, or even months on, is just not something that I'm willing to risk. Especially when you can achieve the exact same look by just taking a little bit more care with your initial layers of charcoal and erasing with a putty eraser back to the pure white of the paper. But I just thought I'd demo it so that you can make up your own mind about it. You can reduce how much the fixative alters the picture by just spraying it lightly, just giving it a mist, rather than heavily coating it on. Obviously this doesn't protect the picture as much, but it sort of reduces how much that white fades. That being said, I still don't like it, so it does actually require me doing lots more layers with black charcoal and white charcoal and more layers of fixative to be able to get it to a place where I'm semi-happy with it. The white chalk is great for doing relatively quick pictures like this, but again, for my larger pictures, I would not touch it. They are purely just black charcoal and the white of the paper. I hope you found the video helpful and you've seen what the techniques I've shown can do, and I hope it inspires you to pick up some charcoal and create your own pieces. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.